Hello, everyone, and it's that time again. Welcome to the Sydney St. James Show. We sure appreciate you dropping in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 15, The Different Steps Towards Finding Forgiveness. Hi, today, everyone, I'm here to talk to you about something that's always on my mind. And it's been there ever since I wrote the novel Faith, 70 times 7. You know, this takes me a long ways back, but when I was writing this novel, which is the true memoirs of Reverend Ada Caston Slaton Bonds, as the first ordained minister in the state of Louisiana, first woman ordained minister, I should say, I can't say just how much writing in a creative, nonfiction historical memoir novel, that when you write a book, that you put all the feeling into the book and descriptions, it can get to you sometimes. And in this book, Faith, that I wrote, I dealt in the scriptures many times throughout the entire novel, and I must say, many times I had water in my eyes. Going over each event or each chapter, there was something that just brought tears to my eyes. It's difficult to say, but one of the most important aspects, or the one that I should say I should highlight, is when the novel talks about forgiveness. You see, the Reverend Ada Caston Slaton Bonds was my grandmother. And growing up, I went to church many times. She also held some exciting revivals, I must say. But the one thing that I never understood was that she had an abusive alcoholic husband. And for 20 years, and the novel talks about a lot of this, he just always was doing things that you might want to slam your book shut and get mad at him and wonder why in the world did Ada stay with him all those years? Well, the one way she stayed with him all those years is that she found forgiveness. Now, you know, I talk to the Lord many times when you talk about finding forgiveness, but how in the world she could find forgiveness in every single chapter out of 20 plus chapters in the novel, you've got me. But she did. So I needed to be careful when talking about forgiveness today. So many people during my book signings and meeting at pickleball at the rec center, we all have different views of the subject. Now, I'm not an ordained minister, so I'm not here to talk on my episode 15 about you going to hell if you don't find forgiveness for someone. I can't help the way I feel about forgiveness when you apply the truth to the matter. You see, my wife has given me so much knowledge in every facet of my novel writing, and I've come to the conclusion and used her input so much, I should give her a copyright acknowledgement. Just the other day, I was producing the audio for a book called The Case of the Ace of Spades that highlights a detective named Vincent Gideon. And I was reading about a slippery slope theory in that segment. And she walked up to me and said, stop my recording. She said, that wasn't a slippery slope that you were talking about in your novel there on your audio recording. I said, do what? Nope, that's not a slippery slope. Well, of course she would be right, because when she graduated from St. Edward's University, one of her courses was about a slippery slope. And I kind of mistook it when I was writing the book and put that slippery slope, I thought, into my book. But she said that wasn't slippery slope. That was pure outright murder with the character that I was talking about. Dang. Dang if she wasn't right. Not a surprise, as she is always right. Right, men? No. That's why I go to her in hard-to-understand situations, and she is the most helpful person in the world. But I'm afraid the situation of finding forgiveness I can't get over my not finding a satisfactory answer. You see, in faith, the Reverend Ada Caston Slaton Bonds found forgiveness for her abusive alcoholic husband every single day of her life. I still, to this very day, have no idea how she did it. I suppose that's because I asked a real-life question. I asked my wife if I were in the World Trade Center and she was talking with me on our cell phones, and then all of a sudden she sees the television screen and she sees me on the news flying out a window after Flight 11 crashed into the north face of the North Tower of the World Trade Center, right smash dab between floors 93 and 99. Would she actually pray for forgiveness for the terrorist who killed me? That, to me, is reality. Yes, we've talked a lot about this exact subject matter so much that I thought I would update in this episode my findings. You know, when you've been hurt or betrayed, do you often discover that it's difficult to forgive? I guarantee you many people do. When it comes to my writing in faith, 70 times 7, I do and still do. The fact is, forgiveness is an issue that both Christians and those who are not Christians struggle with, mainly because it's often very much misunderstood. Take it from me, definitely is misunderstood. Often, we struggle with forgiving someone because it feels like we agree with or condone how they've behaved. Other times, we might even genuinely want to forgive someone, but we just can't seem to get past our anger and our bitterness. You know, I fought with forgiveness and I still fight with it. And, you know, there are moments when we think that we have forgiven someone only to walk away and feel the familiar stab of anger coming back up to the surface at a later time. So, the question I've asked myself many times, what do I do? What do you do? Often, the whole process of forgiveness is so heartrending and confusing, a lot of us just give up on it altogether. Sometimes I give up, I must admit. But you know, making this decision is dangerous. It's crucial that we learn what the Bible teaches about forgiveness and learn how to apply this to our lives. Otherwise, we'll remain stuck in our bitterness, stuck in our anger, and stuck in our resentment. Not only will our lack of forgiveness hinder our relationship with God and with others, but it will eventually affect our physical health as well, possibly even cause an illness. This is why God has commanded that we forgive. And out of His grace, He has also provided us with the best way to do this. Now let me back up just a second and halt reset. In Mark chapter 11, verse 25, it reads, "And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins." After reading this scripture, I went back and asked the same question about the World Trade Center again. Really? Honestly, try and put yourself in the woman's shoes watching her husband of many years flying out the window to his death. Let me interject an important part of my life. I was for years an elder in the First Presbyterian Church in a small community southwest of Houston. I assure you, I am very much a Christian, but I struggle with how Reverend Ada Slaton Bonds found forgiveness for 20 years. God has a path for finding forgiveness, either for someone else or for your own self? Now, I got to do my production manager is pointing at me. I got to do a quick commercial break, and I'll be right back with you. Have you heard about Anchor.fm by Spotify? It's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Yep, Anchor has the tools that will allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome back, everyone, to part 2 of episode 15. So we're talking about forgiveness today. Well, I have come to understand that finding forgiveness is a choice. It's choosing to take a step of faith and not to hold someone else responsible for hurting you any longer. You yourself can choose to remember that God has forgiven you and then extend your forgiveness to others. Not even if you don't feel like it, like I have been for so long. We must choose to release the person into the hands of God. We should not be the one that judges. God is the one who is righteous. He is the righteous judge, so to speak. Let Him make the final decision on the person who has done wrong. Secondly, when we first find the need to forgive someone, it needs to start with a prayer. I did this. And I found myself at first praying prayers that weren't very nice. Prayers of justice and prayers of retribution. And I asked God to give those terrorists in that tower that day what they deserve. But as I continued praying, I tried asking God to bless them and come to their aid. Honest to goodness, I did. I thought anything I could do to bless their life would free my soul. I must admit, though, the jury is still out on this step in my forgiveness process. And lastly, forgiveness is final. When you've finally forgiven someone when you hear something good about him or her, and your initial immediate response is honest joy that something went well with him or something went good with her. It's then you know that you're done. In the case of Reverend Mrs. Ada Slaton Bonds, she did just that. In a revival she was conducting, and she was one of the most greatest evangelical preachers in the state of Louisiana, an emotional moment that caught me with tears glistening in my eyes was when I saw her husband walk down the aisle and knelt at the hand-carved mourner's bench of Ada's father. In those old days, people would go and ask for forgiveness of someone who had done harm to them, or to ask for their own forgiveness for their own sins. Now, here is where I found a giant leap in my finding forgiveness. I call it the final game changer. If you're having difficulty forgiving someone, try practicing this every time you take the Lord's Supper or Holy Communion. Commit to not taking the Lord's Supper until you have refreshed your forgiveness. Use that moment, and that moment at that one time, or during that moment, to pray for the person who has harmed you and bless him or her. For some people, this process may take a few months, it may take a few years, or it may even take many years. But be encouraged. I have come to conclude that the process of forgiveness is possible. with God's help, all of our hearts can change for the better. You know, I would like to conclude my episode today saying that the most encouraging part was that the process of finding forgiveness doesn't happen in a day. It doesn't happen in a year, or it doesn't even happen in a decade. Let's face it, folks. Forgiving others and myself is sometimes easier said than done. However, it doesn't really have to be. So the next time you find yourself feeling hurt by someone's actions or overwhelmed with frustration over a situation that occurred like I have in my writing of Faith and my other novel, Seeing the Power of God, turn to the Bible for advice, even if it's for only a few minutes a day. That way, you won't start to feel all the adverse side effects from the stress of those situations on your mind or your body and, of course, your soul. Not sure where to look for Bible verses about forgiveness? Hey, don't worry about it. Forgiveness can be found throughout the Bible. I found at least 100 scriptures throughout the Bible when I was working on these novels that talked about forgiveness. That will help you pretty much every type of situation that you ever get in. I know. I found them. These Bible verses will not only be great guidelines for you to follow when it comes to forgiving, but they'll also teach you why forgiveness is so doggone important. I'm sitting back and I'm off script now, and as I told you as I'm ending this particular episode, I must acknowledge a few things. One of them is that the Reverend Ada Caston Slaton Bonds was very important in my life because she was my grandfather. And the second thing is, this abusive husband she had for 20 years, he was my grandfather. But when did I really learn about forgiveness? As I was writing this book, one of my grandmother's favorite songs, she sang it in church when she got older, and she sang it when she was playing church when she was 8 years old. Yep, that is absolutely true. This song meant the world to her, and where did she hear it? She was in her home near the Red River outside Coshada, Louisiana. When the workers were going to the field to pick cotton, they walked right by her house and by her window. And as they walked down to the cotton field, they sang a song. And that song was called, Lord, I Want to Be Like Jesus. Now, I searched and I searched because I had to find out where or who or how can I find this song? They sang this back in the early 1900s, so I knew it was going to be difficult. And I looked for it and couldn't find it. Then, after I'd already finished the book, I finally found the song. And this is difficult to talk about because it does bring tears to my eyes again, because I am very, very privy to finding it difficult to forgive someone. You see, my mother, which was the Reverend Ada Slaton Bonds' daughter, was also an alcoholic. And I searched for years how to forgive her for some of the behavior that she portrayed. And I did. As the middle son in my family, every time she would get sober, I'd bake her a cake. And every time I bake her a cake, she'd get unsober. And I did this for years. And then my father and her got a divorce. And after they got a divorce, one of the last things, and it's not worth going into in my episode today, was the type of behavior that made me angry. made me bitter. And I couldn't forgive my mother for this behavior. Yet, back in 1972, I got a telephone call from my mother. She was living in Shreveport, Louisiana. And she said, "Son, I'm going to fly into Houston and I want to sit down and I want to visit with you." Well, my first thing was that I haven't learned to forgive her, but I agreed to the meeting. And I went out and we had a wonderful 3-hour meeting in a little restaurant right near the airport because she was going to catch a plane and fly right back. And in this meeting, we talked, we laughed, we drank coffee, and it was wonderful. And she reached over and held my hand. I had to pause for just a moment. And when she grabbed my hand, she laid in my hand a lighter, a Zippo lighter. And she said, "Sidney, I want you to have this lighter and always remember me with this lighter." Well, we departed and she jumped on her plane and went back to Shreveport, Louisiana. And in 10 days, my father was given a call in which he told me that my mother had passed away. I think the thing about forgiveness, and I talked about it earlier in my podcast, sometimes that anger, that bitterness that we hold for people for so long, and we don't realize that we've never forgiven those even after death. And when I got that telephone call, I was bitter, I was angry, so I went to the funeral, and then I came home, and almost to the writing of this novel, I had never forgiven my mother in my own mind about the way that she had acted and whatever the problems were that caused me to be so angry with her my entire life. And then I found the song. You won't believe this, but I did. You know, I think you've heard in my earlier episodes, I once was a disc jockey for an oldies radio station. I love music. Music is probably, to me, one of the greatest things there is, because when you really sit down and you stare out the window and whatever problems are on your mind, there's certain songs that will make you smile. Well, there's certain songs that will make you remember. And this particular song, the one that was Ada's favorite song, they played it in church all the time once she became an ordained minister, and she played it her whole life. That one song, when I played it, I have to admit, brought tears to my eyes. So earlier in my podcast, I talked about people forgiving, some forgive in a day, some forgive in a week, and some forgive in a decade. Heck, I have found forgiveness, and it may have taken more than a decade or more than 2 decades. But when I play this song for the rest of my life, it will always mean finding forgiveness for people, for the ones you love, or whomever. And if it doesn't bring tears to your eyes when you listen to it closely and think about the one that you can't forgive, and when you do, what do you need more than anything in the world? What you need is Jesus Christ in your heart.
Lord, I want to be like Jesus in my heart, Lord. I want to be like Jesus in my heart. Lord, I want to be like Jesus in my heart. And Lord, I want to be more holy in my heart, in my heart. Lord, I want to be more holy in my heart, in my heart. In my heart, I want to be like
Well, that does it for me for another great episode from Sydney St. James. Be sure to click on the tab above that says send a voice message, and I will get it from you, and I'll probably play it back on one of my future podcasts. Also, don't forget to click the button follow. I'd love for you to follow my podcast. But it's been fun. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, here I am, Sydney St. James. Happy listening.